on Costa Mesa Brief to answer some questions related to AB 109 and the impacts related to Costa Mesa. As a perspective on history, let's touch on the early 1990s and crime rates at that time that were at all-time highs. In fact, significantly less during that period than they are presently. The result of those impacts in California and locally were that chiefs of police and the legislature took things very, very seriously. You saw the redevelopment, reinvigoration of a variety of specialty units that dealt with gangs, narcotics, vice and intelligence, special investigations and special crimes, and probation details, parole details that dealt with folks in our communities that had a history of committing crimes. As well, simultaneously, you saw the advent of the three strikes laws that caused increased penalties for violent offenses, and as well as burglaries, auto thefts, a host of others. Simultaneous to this, the legislature enacted penalties that were focused at violations of narcotics and weapons that would increase those prisoner jail terms related to those types of offenses. Move forward several years and we get into the contraction issues that hit municipal, state, and federal government related to the economy downturn, recessionary period of 2008, 2009. Costa Mesa PD stopped hiring in 2008 because of budget shortfalls. Agencies around Costa Mesa throughout the state, throughout the county, reduced their staffing of law enforcement, as did probation and others. Simultaneous to some of this was the U.S. Supreme Court ruling that the state of California must reduce prison populations, and under Governor Jerry Brown was the adaptation and the creation of AB 109 that would release some of the prison population back down to the local level with authority granted to the county sheriffs and to probation to now supervise some of these, as well as a commensurate amount relative to municipal law enforcement agencies, Costa Mesa, for example, Santa Ana, Anaheim, others throughout the entire state and in Orange County. To date, since the enactment of AB 109 in 2011, 1,700 releases are now in Orange County, 70 specifically in Costa Mesa, which equates to about 5% of the AB 109 releases into Costa Mesa. Now, what does this mean and what does it translate into? It means that we have what in some cases would have been prison sentences now released into local supervision. Those that would reoffend rather than going back in many cases to state prison. Now, if it were a very, very serious offense, they could go back to state prison. But if it's a nominal offense or one, for instance, a light grade burglary or an auto theft, that individual may go into a flash incarceration setting in the county jail rather than being returned to the state prison system. A couple of weeks ago, we had an individual that was a 109 release that had done a flash incarceration relative to a residential burglary case. He was out for about 10 days. We recently rearrested him behind a series of residential burglaries here in Costa Mesa. So we're seeing an influx of those that would have more typically been in the state prison population now at the local level, being supervised by county probation, a larger influence being thrust upon the Costa Mesa Police Department in our community, and in many cases where a violator would reviolate rather than going to a state prison term, more likely would go to a local term in county jail. We have a certain amount of funding available to do specifically what we refer to as AB 109 operations, where we bring in a group of officers to do site visits where we know some of these folks are living. We do probation and some parole checks and searches. We determine their status is appropriate. There appears to be no criminal conduct, that they're in fact living where they are reported to be living. And we do these operations several times a year. We do them as often as our staffing permits. Frankly, I wish we were doing them more frequently, but as in our current staffing level in a contracted state, we're doing these as often as we can. As we build back staffing, it is my hope that you'll see us increase the number of those and take full advantage of the funding that's available for the AB 109 sweeps. What the future holds, it's the recidivism rate relative to both parolees and those involved in these types of release programs is about 70%. We can intuitively anticipate an increase with these issues and problems. And while Part 1 crimes have either held steady or been on the lower side, Part 1 crimes, rape, robbery, murder, assault, and so forth, are not representative of your vice, your narcotics violations, gang-related activities, and or your more sophisticated white-collar or credit-type schemes. So the overall crime trend that we're beginning to see is an increase. Between 2015 and 16, the state may be required to release another 4,000 of the prison population into local control. So we're looking at this very, very carefully with my colleagues around the county and my colleagues around the state. We're tracking this very, very closely, and we're seeking to run as many special operations as we possibly can at a staffing level that we in Costa Mesa are trying to build back. Now bear with me, because not only are we in a contracted state, agencies on all of our borders, absent of Irvine, are at reduced staffing levels. So we're all building back simultaneously. And as that build back occurs, it is our intent to more proactively deal with some of these issues, as well as the more day-to-day operations in and about Costa Mesa.